We're in this together. And what each of our nations does, or does not do, will not only impact people of our own country, but people everywhere.
You know, these steps will set America on a path of net zero emissions economy by no later than 2050. But the truth is, America represents less than 15% of the world's emissions. The United States sets out on the road to cut greenhouse gases in half by the end of this decade.
China will strive to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
Climate change is a lived reality for millions around the world. Their lives and livelihoods are already facing its adverse consequences.
We're working with everybody, from the smallest nations to the biggest emitters, to secure commitments that will keep change to within 1.5 degrees. And I think we can do it.
Japan aims to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 46% in the fiscal year 2030 compared to the fiscal year 2013 as an ambitious target which is aligned with the long-term goal of net zero by 2050.
Our new climate target for 2030 is to reduce our 2005 emission levels by 40 to 45%. And we will continually strengthen our plan and take even more actions on our journey to net zero by 2050.
By 2038, we will phase out coal electrification and we will invest further into renewables.
I'd like to stress that Russia treats its international commitments with the utmost responsibility in this sphere, and I refer in particular to the implementation of the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement.
May I highlight here our commitment to eliminate illegal deforestation in Brazil by 2030 with full and prompt enforcement of the Brazilian Forest Code. With that, we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 50% by that date.